special afternoon because we're going to have a community conversation. Welcome to the Forum on Community Health. My name is Francisco Ronquillo. Thank you. My name is Francisco Ronquillo, and for me it's an honor to be here. When I was asked to be the moderator for this forum, I was a little nervous, but I accepted. Honestly, I am a little nervous, but I am so happy because I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by a lot of friends that are helping fight the fight, improve the work, and improve the health and the well-being.
Mike went out.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you, our community members, for taking the time to come and listen to the candidates that are here running for mayoral candidate of Albuquerque. I also want to thank our esteemed candidates. Thank you very much for attending. I want to name every one of you. I'll start from the right with Mr. Brian Colon, Ms. Michelle Garcia Holmes, Mr. Tim Keller, Mr. Gus Pedroy, and Ms. Susan Wheeler-Deichsel. Please note that we have intentionally set up the room in a way where we're going to form committees. This is a circle where we all come together to address the issues that are impacting a lot of children, youth, and families in our community. But we are here to make a change, and we are here to listen from our candidates what they have to say. Hay tanta gente en Albuquerque que está lista y interesada en cambio. There's a lot of people in Albuquerque that are here ready for change. There are so many people that are here interested in learning what you have to say, what your ideas are, what your plans are to make Albuquerque a better city. Please look around you. This is a reflection of the demographics that we have in our state. The beautiful, colorful people. Where New Mexico is, that's where the U.S. is going to be in 2045. Yeah. We are a rising majority state, no longer a minority majority state. We are a rising majority state. So welcome to the change. Please let me explain briefly the process and the agenda. That way we can proceed. We have a very structured and very tight agenda. So the way it's going to work is we're going to have two community members share their story. We're going to have the candidates reflect and give us 2 to 3 minutes on their thoughts with respect to the stories that they have heard, followed by a question from one of our community members. We're going to have 2 rounds of community questions. We also have Ms. Catherine Ralph over there and Ms. Wendy Wintermead. They're the timekeepers. Please note that when 1 minute is left, she'll raise the 1 minute sign, letting you know that there's 1 minute left to complete your answer. We also have a yes or no question. We have Ms. Catherine Sanchez, and she's going to be documenting. Kathy Sanchez is going to be documenting your answers with respect to the yes or no, or undecided. And we'll also have time for final remarks. We would like to invite all the community members to listen closely to what our candidates have to say, but most importantly, the stories of our community members. If there's an opportunity, we will give you the opportunity to ask a question. So why don't we go ahead and start with the first story. And our first community story is from Ms. Reina Griego. Oh, pardon me, that's right. So one of the big things that we wanted to illustrate is that we are ready for change. So Dr. Angelo Gonzalez is going to show us a framework in terms of readiness. So Dr. Gonzalez.
Right behind you. Welcome everyone. On behalf of United Way of Central New Mexico, Mission Graduate, and the Early Childhood Accountability Partnership, which is known as ECAP, I want to extend a formal welcome to all of the candidates for being here tonight. My name is Angelo Gonzalez. I serve as the Executive Director of Mission Graduate, and I'm also one of the members of the management team of ECAP. Those of you who know me know about Mission Graduate. We're a cradle to career education partnership. We're trying to get more students graduated from school, going off to college, and earning those important certificates and degrees that are going to prepare them well for success in our workforce. But we know that in order to achieve this vision, we have to begin our work much earlier than in high school. And that begins by laying a solid foundation for success during a child's earliest years of life. And that's why our partnership with ECAP and with all of the organizations that are supporting tonight's event is so important. Let me talk for a minute about ECAP, and I'm going to introduce our READY framework so that you can have that in mind for tonight's conversation. ECAP is a place-based collaboration that's designed to improve outcomes for young children and their families from pregnancy through age 8. ECAP is a network of leaders representing all of the key early childhood sectors in our community, including health, early learning, early intervention, higher education, business, K-12 education, and many other sectors. This group is working together and has been working together for a number of years to achieve a single measurable result for change. And that is that all Bernalillo County children will be ready for and succeed in school. Achieving this result is going to take all of us working together to effect change. And we believe strongly that the next mayor of Albuquerque has a key role to play in our collaboration. And so as we get into the discussion this evening, we wanted to start tonight's event by introducing all of our candidates to our ECAP Ready framework, which you can see on your screen, or if you can't see it, there's a document in our candidates packet that looks like this, if you want to pull it out and refer to it. What the framework tells us, you'll see at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see first of all a great visual that was created locally. It's a really awesome visual. Many of you may have seen this equity slide or this equity picture on social media. And I can't remember who did this, Tracy? Michelle?
Leon Mitchell, and he's here.
Yeah, so this is, let's give him a round of applause. This picture really depicts the central equity challenges that we face in our community, and it does it in a beautiful way that showcases our community. At the bottom, though, you'll see our ECAP Ready framework, which tells us that supporting the development of ready children requires a comprehensive set of solutions that's focused on the development of ready communities, ready families, ready services, and ready schools. There's a lot more information in the packet. For those in the audience that would like to read more after tonight's event, please pick up a handout at the table in the back of the room. So I'm going to briefly just describe what each of the categories means so that you can have this in mind tonight. So Ready Communities starts first with addressing the fact that more than half of all children under the age of 5 live in areas of concentrated poverty in Bernalillo County. So we ask ourselves, what can we do differently to reduce poverty rates and ensure that families have sufficient resources to support their children? And also, how can we ensure that our communities are safe and that families have access to affordable, reliable housing? Second, Ready Families recognizes that parents are their children's first and most important teachers. With that in mind, how can we ensure that parents and families have access to the kinds of services that can help them build their skills to support their children's development as well as their school readiness? And also, how can we support parents and caregivers in achieving their own educational goals so that they can provide for their families? Third, Ready Services is about ensuring that we have sufficient capacity in our system of early childhood support services. How can we ensure that families have access to the services they need to support their children, and that they are utilizing those services of support, those systems of support to full effect? And finally, Ready Schools calls our attention to the importance of 3 things: effective transitions, parent and family engagement, and equity. So first, how can we ensure that children are effectively transitioning from that system of early childhood services into our local schools, right? So that they're set up for success. Second, how can schools create welcoming, culturally proficient environments that nurture deep family engagement? And third, in order to address those equity gaps, how can schools take into account individual differences in language, culture, and prior experiences of the children and families that they serve? So as you engage in discussion this evening, we're urging all of the candidates to keep this Ready framework in mind and to consider the various ways in which the mayor's office and the city of Albuquerque more broadly can support change in each of these categories. Again, I want to thank all of the participants for their participation. We're looking forward to a rich exchange of ideas, and if you need inspiration tonight, this is the youngest member of our mission graduate team over there, baby Adeline. She is beautiful, and this is really what it's all about. So thank you all for participating. I'm going to turn it back to Francisco to get us started.
So I would like to explain briefly again the process, the community stories. We're going to have the community stories, the reflection from the candidates, 2 to 3 minutes to respond. And then we have a community question. And then we'll follow up with another community story. The first one is with Ms. Reina Griego and our community health lead, Tracy McDaniel. I'll let them introduce themselves and tell their story.
Thank you. So I'm Tracy McDaniel. I am the coordinator of the Early Childhood Accountability Partnership. I don't think I need to say more because Angelo just did a great job describing what we do. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Reina, and I just would like for you to tell us a bit about yourself and your own background when you were growing up.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. I'm going to just go ahead and read it. I don't want to miss anything. I took some time to put this together. That way you can kind of understand where it is that I come from. So this is my story. In 1977, I was 4 years old, and my family lived in the Santa Rosa on the eastern plains of New Mexico. I was born to a teenage mother who dropped out of high school and a young father who had recently returned from completing his military service after being drafted during the Vietnam War. Financially, times were hard for my young parents, and they did the best they could to provide for me and my younger sister. During those years, my father worked construction and my mother worked for short spurts of time because there was no one there to watch us. The stress of making ends meet was a common factor in our home, and I suppose the stress of poverty can lead to domestic violence, child abuse, as well as alcohol and drug abuse, as they were present in my home as a small child. They were present, but they would not define my family or me. Thinking back to those years, I can still remember the little yellow Head Start school bus that would pick me up each morning in front of my house, just outside of town. I remember always being so excited to get on that bus and join the rest of my friends as the driver headed 10 miles out of town to the small village of Puerto de Luna, New Mexico, where the Head Start was located at that time. There I could be a kid. I had no worries, no fears, just a kid. I was learning my numbers, my alphabet, and critical social skills. I still remember my Head Start teacher, Mrs. Peralta, and how much I looked forward to seeing her every day. I still remember her. So much fun. I was excited for the fun I would have in her class and what I would learn. I learned so many things in her little class, but one thing I recall especially enjoying was circle time reading. My love for books and learning was developed in that little classroom and has followed me throughout my life. All these years later, I look back and can say with certainty that Head Start and Mrs. Peralta helped lay the foundation for my love of reading and learning. Head Start was also a source of encouragement and support for my family as well. My mother would go on to obtain her teaching degree, and she retired from the Albuquerque Public Schools as a 5th grade teacher. My father would complete some college courses and go on to retire from the city of Albuquerque, where he obtained his commercial driver's license and he drove a truck for solid waste. And my sister, who is also a Head Start alumni, has had a long career at Sandia National Labs, where she maintains a top secret clearance working on computers. As for me, I obtained a degree in social work, and I had a long career with the city of Albuquerque, working with the Early Head Start program, serving pregnant women and children birth to 3 years old, and I have accepted another job now with the state with CYFD, so I'll continue to work with children. I myself have been married for 20 years now to a retired Albuquerque police officer. I have a 19-year-old son. He's attending UNM, focused on pharmacy. And so without a doubt, I credit early childhood programs for my success and for the foundation that they helped build and help make me who I am today. They work, and I'm proof of that.
Thank you so much. So with your position as an Early Head Start home visitor, could you describe a family that you know you've impacted through your work with the Early Head Start and how you've impacted them?
Again, if it's okay, I'll just read what I wrote. I would hate to forget anything. So I started my career in early childhood education with the City of Albuquerque's Early Head Start as a family development specialist, was what the position is called, but also known as a home visitor in a lot of your other early childhood home visiting programs. They'll refer to them as home visitors. And I started in that position in 2000. And when I was employed there, I was in charge of managing a caseload of families who either had a pregnant woman in the home or had children between the ages of birth and 3 years old. I was responsible for visiting with them on a weekly basis, where I would teach them about the development of their child. We would talk about healthcare, mental health, nutrition, would talk to them about parenting. And I would also help complete strengths and needs assessments with them to see where the needs were in that household and how best I could help them connect with community resources and how they would go about achieving that. One of the families that I had the honor of knowing, you know, I've had so many families that I had worked with over the years, and you see so many great success stories. But one that immediately came to mind when I was asked to present a story was a young woman that I had originally met. She was in her early 20s. She was single. She had just gotten out of a domestic violence relationship. And when I met her, based on all the tattoos on her arms and her hands, I knew she had been involved in some heavy gang activity in the past. And she was, you know, trying to get straight into her life and be the best mom that she could. At the time, she had a 2-year-old son. She was pregnant with her second child, and she was working a job as a cashier at a local drugstore. She had no help, financial or otherwise, from the father of her 2 children, and she was struggling to provide for her family. One thing for sure, though, is she loved her kids. She adored her kids. After visiting with her for a while and seeing how much she enjoyed teaching them new things, because I would bring in different activities, and she just would love teaching her kids, I remember asking her, what was your dream growing up? Like, what is it you wanted to be, you know? And she said, well, you know, I always wanted to be a teacher. And I told her, well, why don't you do it? And I remember her looking at me like I was crazy. And she was like, what do you mean? And I told her, I said, well, you know, you can still be a teacher if that's what you always dreamed of growing up. And so I remember talking to her about, you know, the possibility of maybe just even starting with 1 class. Because I thought, well, she'll take 1 class, she'll like it, 1 class will lead to another class, and so she did. I remember going with her over to C&M, talking to an advisor, and she got enrolled for 1 class, and she loved that class. Next semester came, and she added more classes, and so it went on. And before long, she was transferring over to UNM. She ended up getting her teaching degree, and you know, it was great. So when her child turned 3, the youngest one, I had to transition her out of our program because we only work with kids until they're 3. And so I helped her transition the youngest child over to YDI Head Start, where they continued services from 3 to 5, and where her older child was. And so she went on her way. I knew she was at UNM, and like I said, a couple of years later, I get an invitation in the mail to her graduation. And it was so cool. And so I went to her graduation, and I remember her just beaming with pride and just, you know, so happy that, you know, she did it. And I remember her giving me credit, and I was like, no, that, you know what, it's not, I didn't do anything. I told her, I always believed in you. It was just time for you to believe in you, and you were ready, and look at all that you've accomplished. And so her kids are actually, I think, 16 and 13 now. She lives in Denver, Colorado, and like I said, she reached out to me, and we're in touch here and there. And she's a mathematics teacher in junior high school. And last she told me she was engaged and preparing to get married. So who knows? Maybe I might get an invite to a wedding too. But just stories like that. You know, that's one of so many that have touched me over the years, and that's why these early childhood programs are so important. You know, and she is just an awesome mom, and her kids are flourishing, and they're just doing amazing.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we just have a couple more minutes, 1 more minute. So very quickly, what could the city do to better support families that have high needs?
Well, right now we need more early childhood programs. You know, home visiting is a big deal, and it needs to happen. You know, we rank 49th in the nation for child well-being, and unfortunately, you know, I've had a long career, like I said, with the city, and I had to leave that position because that that grant is in jeopardy. They're at risk of losing the Early Head Start grant, and a lot of staff is actually leaving because we don't know that they're going to have a program. But you know, I think it's important for the mayor to know how important early childhood education is, and to look at those programs and see what needs to be done and ensure that those programs are around for families that need them.
Thank you.
So now we'd like to hear your response based on the stories that we have heard. So we'll start with Mr.
So Reina, thank you for that story. Very touching and inspiring in so many ways. And thanks for your question. I will tell you that you know, the lens I look through, and I've been saying it since January when we announced this campaign, is the lens that so many of us have in our community. It's a lens of growing up in poverty. It's a lens of understanding that, but for the programs that are supported by federal grants and state grants and by mayors who lead, those are the programs that kept me from falling through the cracks. Blocks of cheese, powdered milk, Section 8 housing, you know what I'm talking about. And I always said the cheese was good, but you could stir that milk for 30 minutes, it still would be lumpy. That lumpy milk, no? So when you talk about those things, it takes me back to my childhood. And for far too often in our community, the families that need it the most, the families that need Head Start education, early childhood development, those are the families who are struggling to find a neighbor, no, that's willing to say, for $4 an hour, I'll watch your baby while you go to work. And they're the families that need those early childhood development building blocks more than any other family in Albuquerque. So if we don't make a deep commitment, a true commitment to funding these programs and expanding early childhood development, with the work that's going on in this community, when I look around the room, I see the leaders in this conversation. And I think the good news is you look up the people that showed up today, these are the people that are also going to lead in that conversation. And I think you're going to get a deep commitment tonight. And when you walk out that front door, you're going to say, Albuquerque's going to be in a better place if one of those people become mayor. And it's because we agree with you. We know how important early childhood education is. We know that it's time to reevaluate the way we approach and address and use the permanent fund here in the state of New Mexico. We know that our budget has to reflect our values. And I've been saying that from the day I announced on January 25th of this year. Our budget has to reflect our values. There's no better investment than in early childhood development. So for me, it's a commitment. It's a place that's near and dear to my heart because I live that story. And so for me, it's easy to make that commitment. That's my 1 minute bill.
That's
No,
you're finished.
No, that says 1 minute.
Well, sorry, the bell went off.
So I'm visual, not audio, see? Thank you so much. But thank you again.
So the bell is for the timer, it's not my phone.
So yes, you have 2 to 3 minutes to respond.
Well, thank you for your story. That is both your story and the story you shared with us are the stories of so many women in our community, so many children in our community. I'm going to share with you, I retired out of Crimes Against Children with the Albuquerque Police Department, so I have seen an eyeful over the years of the poverty, of the difficulties, of the lack of services. Can you all hear me? Am I holding it? Yes. Sorry. Of the lack of services that we just don't have across the state and within our city. Albuquerque is the largest city in the state. We have to start here. We really have to address those issues. And I sat on the Child Fatality Review panel, and I served there for many, many years. Even after I retired, I stayed on the panel and still continued to serve because I thought it was important for our community to find out why. What is causing these child abuses? And we used to prepare a report. How many people are familiar with the Child Fatality Review panel? Oh, good. I'm glad. We used to prepare a report for the state legislature every year, and I often wondered as I continued on to the next year reviewing the child fatalities from the previous year, are they listening? Are they listening? I went on to work at the New Mexico Attorney General's office, but in between I had a little retirement time, and I served on the Children's Foundation for quite some time. And the Children's Foundation supplies grants statewide, and it was started by Alice King. Very good programs. They supply grants to the rural communities. And I would love to see something like that happen here in Albuquerque. I think we can do it. I think we can do that here to help those programs, definitely. The other thing that I did is when I started with the Attorney General's office, I applied for a grant, and it was a joint grant with PED to help young mothers, because I recognized back then, working those child abuse cases and working with the Child Fatality Review Panel, that we had a problem. Once these young mothers had their babies, they were still trying to get educated. They were still trying. Are you serious? I have one more thing to talk to you about. And home visits are important. I know that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And you know, I think for me, I can't help but connect that story to so many that I heard when I was the state senator in the international district, and how there are large swaths of our community that we don't invest in enough, that we don't talk about enough, and that we don't listen to enough, and how we have these pockets all over our city. And for me, this was a huge reason why when I was in the legislature, I fought for early childhood development, for that permanent fund, and I was proud to vote for that every step of the way. And we were so close in my last year too, with a constitutional amendment. But I think for me, when I really step back and think about this, though, this is an old conversation. It's one that we've been having for a while, and it's one we've been working on for at least a decade, if not half a decade. And I think for me, I'm running for mayor to try and actually push that conversation forward, to try and answer that question, or to try and figure out how to actually have more early childhood, have more home visitation. And I think we've got to be honest, a big piece of it comes down to funding. And we have tried to cobble together nonprofits, grant funding, all these different things. What's missing is the city actually stepping up and saying, we're going to do this for every kid that needs it. That's what I want to do. And I think it's important that we try and figure out how to do that. I have several ideas, but one, our city can have the same model as what we've been trying at the state. We've got about $500 million running through the city that we invest in treasury bills. If we invest that appropriately, we can take 1-2%, dedicate that to early childhood development. That, I think, is how we actually make a step change difference. And that doesn't require a law change. It doesn't require anything besides a mayor stepping up and saying, we're going to connect modern finance to actually helping folks in the same way you were able to do it, so that we can actually enjoy that throughout our city.
I do believe this is an exceptionally better format than other forums, and thank you so much for being able to articulate these things. The first part that I really started grabbing onto when you were speaking was when you talked about the bus that came to your home. And it immediately made me recognize what barriers are, and how lucky we are to have services that immediately reduce barriers. And transit is one we often don't talk about in our city and in our community. And there's great opportunity with developments that are going on right now and infrastructure changes we're already seeing to create better access to transit. So I think that that's something we all can look forward to, and it's already within the budget and where we're trying to go. Next, though, is when you talked about really the importance of in-home visitors and why that's important. And it's because not only do you get to empower a parent to have the audacity towards change and to say, I can in fact be this parent, I can learn these skills, I can watch, and I can then provide, but it's also because it immediately takes into context. Wow, it's raining. Sorry, it's really beautiful. It's sunny out. It's an Albuquerque moment. It takes context, and that's so important, especially when the underlying question before this was about how do we transition into classrooms? How do we get from that in-home visit model to early childhood ed to the classroom? When classrooms often lack context, they don't have a very inclusive model about how learning occurs. And so for me, I actually look forward to cooperations with nonprofits, because YDI and SIPI working together, getting Brazelton touchpoint models that actually take into account cultural context is what I want to see out of my community. Because I can't be that speaker, I can't be that voice, and I need it in the classrooms. I need us to shift the narrative of what we see and how we learn, and committing to in-home care is where it starts, because it affects the whole family, and it'll be great when we have community schools everywhere too, and it can continue that narrative. And then it moves into these nonprofits that are already cooperating. And as nonprofits cooperate, we can very clearly show redundant infrastructure, fill in the cracks, and commit more heavily to funding. because Albuquerque is not in a budget crisis, and we have great opportunity to save money in the next 4 years in a big way. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Wheeler-Deichsel. It's because I got my car washed. But it's wonderful, I welcome the rain. As I listened to everyone speak and I listened to your story, Raina, I was sitting here thinking, do I talk about my own childhood or do I just skip over that? I didn't grow up in New Mexico, I grew up in California. Nonetheless, I grew up in abject poverty and with a single mother, and that was because of the scourge of alcoholism. And in those days, most of these programs that we've been talking about that exist now didn't. But my mother walked to work. She was afraid to learn to drive. She finally did, many years later. And I understand many of the things that you're talking about, but not from the lens of being a person of color. So I know that these are things I need to better educate myself on. And here I am now. Well, let me jump back though to when I was 19 or 20 years old and I was talking to Tracy today on the phone. I was a volunteer for Head Start. It was a community program and it was in a place in the urban core of Long Beach, California. My mother was going to graduate school. And it was fabulous and it was a brand new program. And here we all are years later having home visits. So 11 years ago, I moved to Albuquerque and something magical happened. I started being very involved, although I still work. I'm self-employed, have my own business. Very, very involved in things around the city. And I'll tell you, I have an encyclopedic set of knowledge about how things work here and how they don't work so well. And I was going to ask you, is it the Department of Family and Community Services that gets the grant? Because I've done some work with them too. I've done some work with almost every agency around. But not a lot of the nonprofits. So for me, this is an opportunity to really learn more because yes, I absolutely support partnerships. We're going to be completely lost without them, and we must absolutely get the land grant permanent fund to fund more of these things. Sorry for going over.
Thank you very much for your responses. Raina, thank you very much for sharing your story, and Tracy, thank you for your community help. Now we have a community question from Elijah Ramos.
So, as mayor, will you commit to reviewing current programs and ensuring that the city maintains staff and funding to provide high-quality programs to meet the needs of the young children in our community?
Yeah, I see, as you know. It's like the YMCA.
Yes. Yes.
Now we're going to move on to our second community story. And our community story is from Hope Alvarado, and our community health leader is Michelle Melendez.
Good evening. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm the director of Ede Valle. It's a collaborative in the South Valley of Albuquerque among Centro Savila, Casa de Salud, and Access. And these are direct service organizations who serve a lot of the unincorporated county, but there are certain services that are not available in the South Valley, and our clients have to go into the city to receive them. And I'll turn it over to Hope.
Hope Alvarado Union Shed, Torichi Nishle, Nakaitana, Abashis Chin, Totsoni, Dasha Chain, Masquero, Pachi, Dokanachi, Dashanale. Ahot Adson Nishle, my name is Hope Alvarado, I'm with the Navajo Nation, Masquero, Pachi, and Comanche, and then I'm half Mexican. And first, I want to start off by just throwing out a trigger warning because I will be talking about a lot of different traumatic experiences that I have had, and so I just want to throw that out there beforehand. And so I asked Hope to share with us some of what you experienced growing up in Albuquerque and what a lot of us in the community health world refer to as adverse childhood experiences that then have a huge impact on people's lives for the rest of their life. So I was born here in Albuquerque. My mom was a single parent, Dana, Apache and Comanche, and she had absolutely no help from my father. And we grew up homeless, and so my family experienced homelessness. I'm 21 now, and I would say about for 7 years I was not homeless out of my entire life. And one of the things that I want to really highlight is that when you experience homelessness, you are really inside this mode of survival, trying to access as many resources as you can have. My mom trying to access any resources that she could obtain to assist me and my brother. And I'm going to say that there was only one shelter that would take us in, and even then with regulations. And so a lot of what I experienced, a lot of what my family experienced when we were experiencing homelessness was lack of resources that a lot of youth had within the institutions, like education institutions, a lot of support that we didn't have from any other places that could offer us resources. Most of the time we didn't qualify. I was very lucky, my family was very lucky to have access to things like food stamps or TANF. So those types of things really helped my family make ends meet. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. And so, flash forward a little bit, I moved around. Back here in Albuquerque when I was about 15 years old, I experienced homelessness on my own. And I grew up in a household where my mom was struggling so much that she resorted to unhealthy coping mechanisms and found a partner that she later experienced was violent, and it became a DV relationship, which resulted into me experiencing homelessness due to sexual harassment. And so when I first got transitioned inside the shelters, just looking for shelters, I was, I believe, a sophomore in high school, and I was experiencing homelessness. And I was very lucky to have educators who cared about me and went out of their way to help me. And when I experienced homelessness, I experienced a lot of police brutality. I witnessed a lot of police brutality. I was sexually assaulted as well as experienced sex trafficking by the age of 16. And so I was still in high school, and I was very lucky to have things like Title I exist within the institution to help me just have food and connect me with different resources and shelters that I can go to. And as a Native person, this is not new. Most of the time, Native families experience this on an exponential scale, and it seems to be getting higher every year. And so what I experienced within the institutions was lack of trauma-informed staff, cultural competence, understanding of how to work with youth who were not only trauma impacted, but also LGBT plus. So what I'm trying to say essentially is that these institutions need to have trauma-informed staff members. They need to have people who are intersectional, who understand what intersectionality is. We need to have people who know what Albuquerque is, which is a border town to reservations, to pueblos. These are the types of things that have occurred throughout history, that have affected Native communities. It's also called intergenerational trauma. This is, again, it's not new for Native communities, Native families. And there were very limited resources that existed. None of the staff, with the exception of one, actually looked like me, even though they didn't represent the culture I came from. I experienced so many very violent things that were said to me when I lived inside the shelters, and I was doing good things. I was enrolled in high school. I had 3 jobs at one point. I passed a bill to get free tuition for students for foster youth at the college level. And I was doing all of these things, yet when I went back to these centers, these supposedly resources that lacked not only the funding, but the push for people to be trauma-informed, I was put down, I was told all of these horrible things, and I'm really thankful for the nonprofits that and the people that I met on the streets to help me navigate the system and to help me figure out different resources that they had access to as youth so that I could survive and so that I could go to school and so that I could become the person I am today, a first-generation high school graduate and a first-generation college student. And I just believe that one of the things that I would like for you all to really focus on are the resources that are offered to people who are experiencing homelessness and experiencing violence on a daily basis, and creating programs and nonprofits and all of these different things that have culturally competent people. And that means checking your privilege. That means looking at the intersections of oppression and privilege. That means knowing what those words are. And really, when it comes down to addiction, when it comes down to homelessness and cycles of violence, understanding that you cannot blame the victim for these things. You need to blame the structures and the institutions for not helping the people who fall through the cracks and the families who fall through the cracks. Because, again, this is not new. And so, I want to touch on another aspect of whenever I experienced homelessness, which was law enforcement and juvenile detention and incarceration systems, and the racial and ethnic disparities that exist within those institutions that perpetuate and violence on people of color. Even though we have not a high population of certain ethnic groups within Albuquerque, some of those populations are overrepresented within these systems. And those are huge problems. And then also considering that Albuquerque is a border town, a lot of the native people from the neighboring Pueblos and Navajo Nation and Apache Nations, they come here looking for resources because we lack resources there. And so this border town needs to prioritize the large indigenous population that they do have. Indigenous meaning not only tribally enrolled, because from what we understand as indigenous people, the borders crossed us. And so that means prioritizing as well undocumented communities and making sure that they feel safe within Albuquerque. And so I really want to say, back on the idea of law enforcement, what I saw on the experiencing homelessness for chronically 5 years was very violent. We do not need more law enforcement. We need our law enforcement to undergo cultural competence, to undergo trauma-informed trainings. We need more law enforcement to focus on actually protecting the people here in Albuquerque instead of trying to enforce policies and laws on them. Thank you for sharing that, Hope.
So for the first question, we started from right to left, so now we'll go from left to right.
Hope, there were so many things in your story. First of all, thank you. And I'm very, very proud of you. Your ability to sit in front of a group like this and tell your story without breaking down. I mean, it's hard for me to not. But with respect to policing, I agree. We do know that we need more police officers, but indeed we need them to be culturally sensitive. And one of the ways that we could approach that is by trying as hard as we can to have our police officers also be culturally representative. And I'm not sure how we do that. Other than going right out to the places from which they may spring and offering them the deal and the idea that they could be an important part of the goings-on in our city and how important that is. What were the other questions? I can't remember. I was following your story so carefully. I don't remember what the asks were. It's reflection. Oh, okay, even better. Once again, I was thinking about my own story. I didn't experience homelessness until I had finished my BA degree as a financial aid kid, and then worked for a couple of years. I was working, as a matter of fact, in a morgue where we did autopsies and postmortem examinations very often of children who were the victims of domestic violence. So I've seen it, and I know what we're talking about here. Then I went back to school to take pre-med, hoping that I would eventually get to go to medical school, and ended up homeless and sleeping in my car. Until 2.5 years later, I got affordable housing. And as soon as I finished pre-med, then California passed Prop 13 and student aid was gutted. So that was the end of that. I went away and started doing menial work, and eventually ended up here in Albuquerque. I've had a number of businesses over the years, and here I am before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you, and I want to start by acknowledging that we are a border town. But more than that, we're a violent border town, and Albuquerque's the aggressor. And we commit these acts of violence. It is us. And with that being said, I also want to acknowledge the privilege that allowed me to stand here as a mayoral candidate as a young person and even be heard in the first place. That is great privilege related to me being white and also being male. So how do we do it differently? What do we have to do different? And this is one of the reasons why I run, because I am so scared into the time when we only want to talk about crime that we're about to reflex to a law and order dialogue that's always been oppressive towards our communities. And that cannot be the case moving forward. And that's why I'm proposing an entire structure shift where we don't respond to situations of homelessness, to addiction and behavioral health with police force. We know that's the wrong place for them. And we know that there are better resources in our community and actual community wisdom to bring us out of those depths. How do we do this? It's simple. It starts back at dispatch. We renovate the system, and we actually have paraprofessionals responding who are actually sensitive towards context, who do understand trauma. This allows police work to be done elsewhere, because this is service-based. And when we do this, we do get to cooperate with the nonprofits that are the community wisdom, because I don't trust these large systems anymore. I want First Nations to be able to deliver the health care they're trying to give for their communities with that context. I want to see groups succeeding in our community, offering real empowerment towards those goals. The city does not get to do that alone. The city does not get to stand up like that. We need to pass off the reins and facilitate this. We can do this through a small clinic-based care model, much like what Project ECHO has already proved in our communities and how it delivered care to hepatitis C in the South Valley and West Side. We can have one-stops where people aren't tasked with figuring out which shelters will take them, because there are so many barriers to figuring that out, and we know shelters aren't really that safe either, and actually provide these resources up front. Ask questions and then provide the services. Not ask questions and then boot somebody back out to go and fend for themselves in a very complicated and arduous system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I too want to start with acknowledging my privilege. I've had plenty of it, and I realized about 10 years ago, whether it was college-educated parents or my own educational background, obviously being a white male, I decided 10 years ago that I was actually going to quit my corporate career and all of that, the privilege had given me, to try and change this. And I think that's what we owe the community, and that's what I owe you in an answer. And so I want to make a couple of things clear. I am 100% for sanctuary cities. I don't mind saying that. I don't mind arguing about the definition. And I've had a track record of doing that when I was in the state legislature. Second thing is, every city employee, if I'm mayor, will have cultural competency training. The third thing is, we're going to make sure that city government and the police department reflects our city. It might take some time, but we're going to use every racial equity tool possible to make that happen, and then we're going to need everyone in this room to help do that. I think the last thing that I would share about this, you brought up all of that intersectionality that's all wrapped up. And the only thing I can say is we have to have an answer that deals with a little bit of that. I think we should be like a lot of other major metro areas and actually have a consolidated public health authority between all the jurisdictions, so we get rid of this, this notion of we are a border town, but the amazing thing is we fight about our own government borders that are totally meaningless to anyone except for the people who actually need that funding. And if we set up a hub and spokes model, actually like Gallup, I spent several years working for tribes, and they have a decent hub and spokes model where nonprofits are out in the community, they're from the community, and then there's still a centralized location where folks can go at that point of trauma. And I think that's what we have to have. There has to be one place in Albuquerque that everyone knows they can go to regardless of what that trauma is. And we've actually got to build that. That's what the city's got to do. We've got to invest it, just like we do the zoo and everything else. If it's really a priority, let's pay for it.
Thank you, Mr. Keller.
You've touched on so many issues that are near and dear to my heart, and I'm sorry that you went through police brutality, because being a police officer for 20 years, it's about respect. It's about helping people, and that's why I got in the police department. So I apologize for those officers who treated you badly. And over the years, I recognized a lot of different things, and I want to talk about the services. I think back about your mother not having services, not having child support. When I worked at the Attorney General's office, we recognized this, and we worked jointly with the Public Education Department, and we worked on this grant to get legal services for young mothers. And it was so important, because these young mothers had babies, they needed child support, they needed help, they needed legal advice to move them in a direction so that they could eventually have a home and be living on their own and raising their children and work on education at the same time. I serve on a committee about human trafficking. Human trafficking was something that was real important to me when I was a police officer, seeing women on the streets, seeing young girls sell their bodies just for a meal that night. That is no way to live. And we still have that going on in Albuquerque today. We have over 5,000 youth at any given time that are living on our streets, that are homeless, and that's not right. And when I worked at the Attorney General's office, we helped pass we were first in something, Albuquerque, the first human trafficking bill. We passed that under the King administration when I served there. And I met with NGOs, and I talked to the groups that came that were going to work with these women, and we talked about trauma, how important it was to be an NGO that understood you have an individual coming in here, and she or he is suffering from a trauma. So I definitely will be a mayor that understands these issues and will work on these problems. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia-Holm.
Hope, thank you for your story. You inspire me. You inspire me because I know that the strength that I hope that we can all find, you have found. And I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful that you could share it with us today. I've shared a little bit about my background, and all I can say is that yes, even I, being a young man who was an island unto himself after burying his father when his dad was 49, and having grown up with alcoholism in the household, and having to deal with all the things we had to deal with, and being in that island unto myself, it is just a life that pales in comparison to what you had to go through. And so there are even times when those of us are people of color, those of us who have come from difficult circumstances, we need to be put in check. And so I think in some ways I just want to acknowledge you did that for me today, and I appreciate it. Because I've been talking a lot since January 25th of this year about the life I've led. And sometimes it's difficult to keep that life in context and realize how much we don't know about. So thank you. As to the specifics of what you brought up, I want to say this. We have to make sure that we make a deep investment when it comes to serving the population that is underrepresented and not heard in this town. We have to make sure that every policy that we implement in this community is looked through the lens of a racial equity tool, to make sure that we understand not just the benefit of a program to a community or to people of color in this town, but also the burden. Because if we don't explore the burden on the community that may not have a voice, then there are unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences are often more harmful than the consequence that we're trying to address. So for me, it's about making sure that we are having these conversations about inclusion and intersectionality, and making sure that we're using conveners that have credibility, like this room, conveners like the United Way, conveners like the Albuquerque Community Foundation, where people of color can come together and feel comfortable and feel heard, because that doesn't happen often, as it should, here in our beautiful city. But it can happen here. We'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Colon. Soon one of you will be an elected official, and we want to thank all the elected officials in the room. Will you please stand up, the people that are elected officials or representatives that are joining us tonight? Thank you. So we have another community question, and this community question is coming from APS board member Candy Patterson. In order to honor the language that we have, pardon me, please. In order to honor the languages that we have in New Mexico, English, followed by Spanish and all the native languages, we're going to ask this question in Spanish, but it will be translated into English.
Muy buenas tardes. Muy buenas tardes. Como alcalde, se asegurará de que los programas financiados por la ciudad de Albuquerque cuenten con recursos adecuados y que cuenten con personal que esté bien capacitado y culturalmente competente, que esté informado sobre el drama y que no perpetúe ciclos de violencia contra la gente, ¿sí o no?
So the question is, as mayor of Albuquerque, will you assure that early childhood programs are well financed through the city, staffed appropriately, and the staff are culturally competent and trauma informed to stop the perpetuation and the cycles of violence? Yes or no? Ms. Will?
Is this a nod? I think we're all saying yes.
Mr. Verdorli?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Ms. Garcia Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Colon?
Sí, como no.
Sí, como no. Sí, yes. Thank you. So now we're moving on to our second community question, and that's coming from Ms. Lisa Duval.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. My name is Lisa Duval. I'm with the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. How much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay, I can do this in 2 minutes. So I think I wanted to start by just saying that we actually know what it takes to end homelessness. People need safe, affordable housing. Well, so that really is it. And then folks need supportive services that are appropriate or culturally competent and that meet people's needs where they're at. But it really starts with affordable housing, and that is pretty much the foundation for everything else that we're talking about tonight. A couple quick stats. In Albuquerque, a household has to earn $16.88 an hour in order to afford a very modest 2-bedroom apartment. That means a single mom with 2 kiddos has to work 73 hours a week at a minimum wage job in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Also, in New Mexico, for every 100 households that are extremely low income, there's only 45 units available that are actually affordable to them. The rest are living in unaffordable housing or are homeless because they can't find housing they need. There's really 2 strategies for increasing the supply of affordable housing. There's vouchers that folks can take out to private landlords like Section 8. We can also build more high quality affordable housing. So I actually have 2 questions for folks tonight. One is, would you support increasing the city-funded Housing First program, which provides vouchers to people experiencing homelessness? Right now, primarily people that are chronically homeless, but I would love to see that program expand to families and youth. That's one. Would you support increasing housing vouchers through the Housing First program? And 2, we can increase funding for new construction by setting aside 8% of the GEO bond every cycle for the Workforce Housing Trust Fund. We used to do that, we don't anymore. So my second question is, would you support reinstating an 8% set aside of GO bond funds every cycle for the Workforce Housing Trust Fund, which has been a very effective tool for developing high quality rental housing for low income households.
Thank you. And for the record, we will start with the first answer to the first question. Mr. Colon, your answer is?
The first question
Yes.
was, I think we all did that.
Yes.
The vouchers.
See the vouchers, no? Yeah, it's yes. Okay. And then can I, oh,
And then there's, oh, then
Do you want us to do both?
Sure.
We just, okay, yes and yes. I think that's important. Having a home, it's,
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes, but may I add something? Is that okay, or is that playing outside the rules?
Go ahead.
Just before we started, I was talking a little bit about inclusionary zoning, which is an instrument, a tool used in many regions of the United States, in which zoning codes in various regions and municipalities require that those who are developing new housing or redeveloping older housing will absolutely set aside a percentage that's agreed upon by that community. I don't think 8% is enough. Other municipalities around the country, they aren't much higher, but they're somewhere between 10 and 15%. And then they determine what area mean income may be, and then percentages that will be required. As a matter of fact, one of the places that has done it most recently is San Francisco, with great success, but many cities around the U.S. have done it successfully. I have been working, as have others, on who are among the candidates, been working with the city on our update of our own zoning codes and our it's called the ABC to Z, and it's the comprehensive plan and the update of our zoning codes. And I have talked quite a lot, as has former Mayor Rusk, talked quite a lot about inclusionary zoning, and our city's pushing back on that, as has the development community around our area. And I think we have to push back harder on them, because we must have these kind of updated zoning codes here for our people.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. So now we're going to move on to a series of questions, and we have a series of questions from the community. These questions are going to vary from impacting with respect to planning, with respect to the environment. So the first question that we have is from Mr. Terry Schlicker.
Thank you. And this question is a product of lots of us in the room, not just me. I just had the most beautiful voice, so I guess I was asked to say it. Okay, so thank you all, especially community members, for your service. Mayor candidate, where do you stand on the need for a local health planning authority for the Albuquerque metro area? You may know that Albuquerque and Honolulu are the only largest cities without local health departments. And in fact, the Healthcare Task Force provided recent recommendations to the Bernalillo County Commission that included the formation of this kind of structure. Would you support the creation of a city-county health planning authority or a local health department that would do the same thing, that would put us on a path toward efficient use of public resources for health and social services, that would measure progress in addressing critical public health issues and bring us in line with our healthier, more engaged peer cities?
For this question, every candidate will have 2 to 3 minutes to answer. So feel free, we went from left to right, right to left. Whoever wants to answer first, and we'll discuss it. Ms. Wheeler.
I'll do it, thank you. And I'll be short. Yes, I've been thinking about this, talking about this, especially with physicians that I know who are very, very interested in public health, all of the various intricacies of what's going on here in Albuquerque, and who are righteously appalled that we don't have this. I don't know why it's missing here, and I absolutely support it.
Definitely yes, and we are at a very optimal time to do this because of the behavioral health tax at the county level, and also because we need massive restructuring going on as well. That's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this small clinic care model, because we also have to decentralize healthcare, It has to be more contextual, and we have to really prioritize ongoing care, not just responding to things that are in crisis. Those numbers are already there, and they're astronomically expensive. So actually, by creating a board like this, by making sure that we have people watching health in our communities at a population health level, at a one-to-one peer-to-peer model, we can ensure that we're delivering better care. Again, we're reducing redundant infrastructure, we're filling in cracks, and it's actually a cheaper point of service. This is exactly the type of an investment a city can take on, because these are going to be soft money savings. It's hard for us on the front end. It's infrastructure, there are dollars. But on the back end, we reduce strain on our jails, on our emergency service infrastructure, on our hospitals, and we actually clear this up for the services they have to provide in the community. Not tasking these institutions with being places of, ongoing health care. Hospitals are, again, for emergency service. So yes, I entirely support this. There are funding bodies ready to go, and there's a cooperative environment going on right now to tackle large systemic issues in our community that makes this the perfect time to go for a big structural change. Thanks. And also, Project Echo, really great. Check it out. I'm sure most of you know. Thank you.
I gotta plug Project Echo more. Where my father-in-law works. It is an awesome model. I think I'd like to say maybe two things on this. One, I think I already answered this because I talked about it in a previous question, so I definitely support it. I do think it's important to think about how we can actually get this done. And I do think that's where experience plays a little bit of a role, because the city council would have to vote for this, the county commission would have to vote for it, maybe the legislature would have to vote for it. And I think it's helpful that I at least know a lot of those folks. Most of them don't like me because I'm their auditor, but we have worked together. And when I say work together, it's not that I know them socially. We have fought, and we have agreed, and we have used carrots and sticks to try and get things done. And that's the only way we're going to get this. You've got to put some real moral authority from the mayor's office, that bully pulpit, and you've got to work all sorts of angles at these different levels to get it done. And I do think that's why this is something that we shouldn't just say, yeah, we're going to do it. I actually want to do it. And to do that, it's going to take a whole lot of hard work and a lot of everyone in this room doing a whole lot of advocacy too. Now, I think I have a little bit more time, so I want to mention housing. I love that Susan said that, because I want to give her credit. You know, none of us have ever talked about the zoning and planning issue. We all have our pet issues. I've got one that everyone's heard up here that I'm going to mention in a minute, but that is Susan's, and so I want to give her credit for that. So here's mine. Housing, vouchers. This is a real choice. We all say we want to support housing vouchers, and we say budgets are a reflection of our priorities, and I agree with all of that. But let's actually think about what we're doing with our budget money. Last year, instead of actually filling every need for a housing voucher in our city, let's say that's roughly $5 million, we're putting up a new fountain in Civic Plaza. You can point to project after project that we are choosing instead of things like housing vouchers. And so I think that's very important to remember. I'm running for mayor to make different choices, to actually prioritize housing vouchers instead of fountains. We can do the fountain next year. Right now, let's actually house every homeless person in Albuquerque.
Thank you, Mr. Keller.
You know, being mayor is all about priorities. And I was just reflecting as Tim was talking, you know, we have homeless issues, we have mental health issues, we have addiction issues. We need to collaborate. We all are seeing this work being done in silos, and there has to be better collaboration. And if it's one thing I've learned over the years working in the police department, working with the Attorney General's office, spearheading programs, statewide summits, and working on these issues and bringing people together and talking about issues and then moving forward and getting them done, it's about collaboration. We have to get together on things, because if we continue to work in silos, we're not going to take care of the problems that we have. And they're big problems, and they're real problems, and they're growing, and they're costing us money. And I think the most effective way to handle these issues is to work collaboratively. So I would definitely be a mayor that would want to sit down, see what that looks like, and definitely want to collaborate with the county, because the county have a lot of funds right now to work on these issues. And let's get the job done. Let's start working together to achieve our goals. Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Concepcion.
Yes, thanks for the question. You do have a great voice. I just want to say I like it very much. I like it very much. He's singing next. So absolutely, I think that authority is the perfect approach. And I do want to say that Gus is exactly correct, because we are in a position to where we can do something large. We can do a position that we can take that this behavioral health initiative is a perfect time. The county has finally done a good job in recent months. It took far longer than we wanted it to, but they have finally started to deploy those funds into the community. But where they start, disagree or agree, they started with services as opposed to bricks and mortar. I'm very much interested in making sure that we have the bricks and mortar to back up those services. I love PB&J more than anybody, so it's not a programmatic conflict that I have there, it's just an approach. I do think we have to have behavioral health centers and treatment centers, along with our mental health treatment centers and our drug addiction treatment centers. Because all of these things are directly correlated to the underpinnings of what is troubling our community, which is poverty. The abject poverty, the cycles of poverty that are so difficult to break, which I was so fortunate to break with the help of the community, that my son will never know. That doesn't happen if we don't have these systems to break the cycle. I appreciate the work you do with the coalition, because if there's ever a difficult table to set, it's the table to end homelessness. Because everybody, like me, we've all gone out and done the point in time counts. We've all gone down, we remember the Metropolitan Homelessness Project, and now we've got a better way. And we've got all these programs, and we're all passionate, but it's very difficult to convene us, right? It's not as easy as it says, right? Like even Albuquerque Community Foundation, United Way Central New Mexico, the great conveners all have difficulty getting us to focus. But I do think that the voucher program is spectacular. I do want to say the health authority is very necessary. I think the work that you're doing in the South Valley is a perfect microcosm of a model for one-stop healthcare and wholeness. Because that's what they're doing in the South Valley, and if you haven't seen it, you better go down there, because be prepared to be inspired. You're talking about education, you're talking about farming, you're talking about healthcare, you're talking about wellness, mental health, classroom experience, farm to table. Do we have a restaurateur out there yet? I'm ready, okay? Let's make that happen. But I'm telling you, that is like the microcosm of what we can do on a larger scale in our community when it comes to delivery systems. And I hope that we can mirror your good work. Thank you, Michelle. So with that, I would just close and say that these are all priorities.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
Oh, I didn't hear the beep word.
Well, because I thought you were done. You said thank you.
Oh. Do you know how many times I say thank you every day? Are you kidding? Oh my God, goodness. When you come from where I came from, you gotta be thankful all the time. Thank you, Mr. Colon.
We have another community question, and that's from Ms. Leah Stein.
My question is going to address the other end of the spectrum of age and family. So we talked about early childhood, family services, but New Mexico's senior and elderly population is projected to be one of the highest per capita in the country by 2030. One in the top 5. And this is going to impact our city, of course, since so much of our population lives here in the city. The city of Albuquerque has robust services for seniors that can get out and enjoy senior centers and a lot of the other offerings. And I imagine this will continue for our city, which is great. But many seniors need home-based care, and the current system is underdeveloped, fragmented, and largely fails both the person receiving the home-based care and the caregiver. So this is a workforce question to some extent. You can speak in general terms, but also what can the city of Albuquerque do to ensure that a well-trained and adequately compensated caregiver workforce is available and ready to meet these future demands?
Thank you, Leah. You have 2 to 3 minutes to answer the question. Who wants to start?
They might need a break from me. Yeah, Barbaro, I just finished, no? I will start though. I'm on a roll. We're on the circuit together. You'd be surprised how much we get along up here. It's pretty amazing. Talk about collaboration right here. We're missing a couple. Maybe that's why it's easier tonight. Huh? Yeah. So, ready?
Okay.
So here's what I say to that. So I think you bring up an incredible point that none of us take the time to talk about. So I appreciate you spotlighting an issue that we failed to discuss. Workforce development in an area that's so special and important, and that's the caregivers in our community. And where we're having this event is also a great place to have this conversation, because we talk about programs like the Meals and Wheels program, and these programs that the nonprofits in our community that actually serve that population that you're speaking about. And what I want to do is something that I went to a conference probably 4, 5, 6 months ago, but AARP sponsored a phenomenal community conversation about making us an age-friendly designation. And this is a designation you can get as a city. There are about 500 or 600 cities around the world that have this designation. You may be familiar with it. But you get this designation by being tuned into the issue. Now, how comfortable, how friendly, how accommodating is your city to seniors and those in need? And I think that this is an opportunity for us to lead. And I want us to be the first city here in New Mexico to be able to get that designation. I think the current administration has started this conversation, and I hope to be able to finish it and get the gold star on that question. And so I do believe that we have an opportunity to lead when it comes to senior and attracting seniors to Albuquerque and to New Mexico. Obviously, as we know, that aging population has a lot of financial benefit to a community for which they go. They aren't very burdensome on the systems, but they do bring their pockets of wealth on occasion, and that's good for a city. So I do think that we have great opportunities to make this a sector that we're passionate about, and that we attract people, not just from Albuquerque that are here to stay, but also attracting external individuals to come to New Mexico, which addresses our population dwindling right now, and which has an impact on our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fong.
Well, I'm going to be a mayor that markets our city to retirees, because I think that's important. I think it is. But we have to be careful in that area, because then we start taxing the area that you're talking about. And really, it's about collaboration. And this goes to economic development too, because when I go to the AED luncheons with the business community, they talk about the same exact thing, is that we don't have an educated workforce for the type of businesses we have. And the collaboration that I'm talking about is we need to collaborate with our high schools. We need to collaborate with CNM, UNM, our universities, to ensure that our educated workforce is actually happening at those stages. Is it happening? And I'm not seeing it happen because of the complaints that I'm getting on the campaign trail, when I'm meeting with business people, and then with your question here. If we can get better collaboration with our educational facilities and make it, we'll express to them the importance of this, I think we can start moving in that direction. But one thing I want to do is I want to talk about the business community. I would love for our business community to start internship programs with the business community, with our youth. I think it's really important to start internship programs. When I was with the Attorney General's office, we had a very robust internship program for attorneys that were going to UNM Law School. And every summer, we would bring in about 12 attorneys. And they just loved it, and they revitalized our attorneys, because you had all these young attorneys who were just dying to go to court or get before a judge or write their first brief. And you had these older attorneys that were working on cases that were like, why are you so excited about this, right? And internship programs will give our youth guidance on life skills and maybe fields that they hadn't even thought of getting into. I think that's really important, and I would like to work on more internship programs. Was that the bell? Yeah. Okay. I was going to mention one other thing.
Well, I think this population, it's important to kind of unpack them a little bit, because there's a broad spectrum there. I mean, there's elder homebound, sort of, you know, we can pick our ages, which I'm not going to do, all the way back to sort of semi-working consultants. And so I do think we have to sort of match services and where the city's going with the different segments. So maybe to just bifurcate that a little bit. For folks, I think, which is the biggest generation in terms of, or demographic, both the baby boomers, there are a couple of things that jump out. you know, they can get to community centers, and to make every city community center a multi-generational center, I think is a low-hanging fruit. And those of you, when you've been to those centers, like, there's such an amazing difference when you go to one of the two. And so I think there's even grant funding available for this and so forth, and so we should commit to that as a city. And that's creating space where both generations can actually come together. And I used to do that. I remember going to the gym at Manzano Mesa, and it was literally, you know, 14 to 85. It was awesome. But that also amazingly happens in the computer room. And you literally almost always get younger people teaching older people how to use the computer. But I think there's also something about the workforce, and I think that's what's really important about that question. I think about things like the Health Leadership High School right down the street, and I think about how there's an opportunity in a lot of sectors in healthcare, but especially in elder care, for apprenticeship-style training in high school, so that folks can actually get that job out of high school, collaborate with CNM to get that associate's degree while they're in high school. I think that's a program we should expand as an after-school training program in every high school in the city. So it's basically taking the great concept of the charter school and making it available at every high school. And then we've got to partner with the city to do transport, so those students can actually learn that after school. That's their after-school program, is learning elder care through a mentor program. So to me, those are some ways I think that we can make a difference on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
I want to talk about care that can't really be provided in multi-generational centers, which are great, but again, you brought up the access to those centers that is sometimes diminished by varying conditions. You know, even the Sunband can be exceedingly difficult to access and get on and to get someplace and then wait, and especially if you need ongoing care. Also, care is extremely sensitive, and there's also huge abuses that happen in home as well that we have to be vigilant of. People literally become invisible, and that can never again happen. So this kind of goes into a housing model in the first place. There are a lot of talk about like recruiting and population that's already here. When we talk about integrated housing, we normally talk about that for mixed income, but we don't talk about it as a live-in intergenerational facility, which we've seen work in other countries. And in fact, then you can actually subsidize people's housings. This isn't a paycheck, this is again a soft money savings, because we know rent at some point is eventually going to pay itself off and developments are good. And we can increase density downtown, closer to amenities, all these things, and we can actually create more interaction between intergenerations in housing facilities and provide that ongoing care. Similarly, if you look at populations that might be experiencing situations of homelessness and you're trying to get them into these facilities, you can also have live-in caseworkers or social workers. And again, this provides better access to the care. You get to see it ongoing. It's not just a crisis response. This is how we need to start thinking about developments moving forward. It's not an assisted living facility. It's us choosing to be part of that living, for them to assist us too, because we all have something to learn. Because we do have programs like Teen Years that pair teens and seniors and make a great word to help them with technology. But that doesn't happen where they are sometimes. And if we do that in communal spaces that are also where we live, it creates better access, it helps create the densification downtown that we're interested in, gives us a soft money savings opportunity, and it also builds community off of this in the first place, because we're living together. We're living out loud now. And we don't become invisible because our access to services that are underfunded don't get us where we need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Pajor.
I'm just adding on to that. Other forums I've been to have told me that when I say that, they laugh at me. Or I don't know if they're laughing at me or with me, because there are so many terrific things that come out of our panel. And yes, we've been doing a roadshow together. Tonight is number 27, I believe. So I don't want to repeat things that have been said by other members of the panel, because people can get bored. So I want to say some other things. First of all, I qualify as a senior citizen. I'm on Medicare. I've been in AARP since I was 50 because my husband's 11 years older than me. My husband, who is 11 years older than me, so he's 77, I just told you my age, works full-time for the city of Albuquerque at a job that he loves. So one of the things we haven't been talking about is people who are technically seniors, and or the definition of what we call seniors may not be the same thing that we think of as seniors from when we were younger, or my grandparents. I think back on my grandparents, and I'll bet when I thought they were really old, they were about 50. So life has really changed, and all seniors are not poor, but a lot of them are, because life has really changed in that respect too. So in order to give inclusive services wherever they're needed, a couple of things that haven't been discussed yet not that they wouldn't be if we had more time, is great public transit for everyone. And prioritizing our community infrastructure, which means our sidewalks won't be filled with places that are lifted everywhere. We'll have good lighting in communities so that people can walk around and feel safe. Things like that benefit everyone also benefit seniors as well. Caregiving is something we're really going to have to explore very, very carefully. And that's it. I'm just going to stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler-Deichsel. We have one more question, and that is from our community member, Dr. Christine Sosa.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a two-pronged question. The first part of the question is, will you please give me an example of an environmental injustice in the city of Albuquerque? The second part of the question is, as mayor, what kinds of policies and procedures will you promote to end environmental injustice, to decrease environmental injustices in the city? Thank you.
Thank you. So this time we'll start in the middle. How's that, Mr. Keller?
That's a great question. A couple of things that come right off the top of my head. The Edith transfer station that's proposed. So I think there's one right there. There's the recycling issue down in East San Jose and what's happening there. I remember the cement plant one. I think that was Springer. I forget the name of it. When everyone actually had this dust that was like in their home and they were breathing it, and it was from the cement factory. I think in the old in my old international district, the jet fuel leak is another example there. So those are a couple, to name a few. I think what to do about it. I think there's a couple of things. Number one is it has to be a priority for the mayor, and I'm excited that we've been talking about environmental justice since the beginning of this campaign. And for me, you've got to make sure that you have the appropriate people to defend environmental justice issues on all the relevant boards and commissions. And the special one on that has to do with the permitting. So when we're doing our zoning, when we're doing our planning, and when we're doing our air permitting, there has to be what I believe is the first step in every major project, which is a health impact assessment. And I was proud in the legislature to actually run this bill. It was the first of its kind in the country. And I think Missouri finally did it, and San Francisco has it. Unfortunately, mine did not pass. But one of the reasons why I'm running for mayor is so we can actually have it at the city. If we go through that process to have a health impact assessment, that's how we institutionalize environmental justice in all our policies.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. What's good?
Tim listed off so many, like I feel like I have to do 6 to show you that I too know about environmental justice. No, I'm just gonna give you one. The one I like to talk about right now is the rail yards, because that happened a long time ago. And the fact of the matter is that that's actually what's holding up the repurposing of that entire area. And maybe one that we don't know about, because we'll never know because there's no environmental impact study, was art. So, who knows? Weird. Where do we go from here, though? What do we do with these areas, and how do we protect this moving forward? First of all, when we bring new industry to Albuquerque, which needs to happen and we should be excited for and we shouldn't be scared of, we choose our own terms for our communities. And that means making sure we know exactly what they're putting up and what they're putting out, and holding them to higher standards, because that is what zoning can do. That's why we have zoning. That's why we have these codes to say like, oh, that's antiquated, or nope, not asbestos, that one was wrong. We know these things. And this is a standard that we have to put forward. We can't cut corners on that. They are developing on our land. We don't get a second try at finite resources, and they are responsible for what they put up. So we hold them to that very harshly. Second of all, we can also try and renovate other industries to bring a new standard to them. And the ones I like to talk about is through the pharmaceutical industry. We can bring new standards to the commercialization and what chemical processes we use to make vaccines here, and also in solar production. Right now, silicon, primary agent of photovoltaic cells, requires clean rooms, requires intense processes on the term of energy and as well as materials. There are new compounds coming out like perovskite that reduce this. We have new technologies in town like pajarito powder, which is making these cells more accessible. So not only do we get to stand up for our community through ordinances and zoning, but we get to stand up for entire industries and futures for the nation and internationally moving forward. And I'm so happy to stand up and fight for that from Albuquerque.
Thank you, Mr. Paguri.
That was awesome. And all of mine but one have been ticked off the list, and that is laundry. Lawn-dry, you know, on 12th Street?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's been talked about in Wells Park and in my downtown neighborhood. Oh, but no, there is one other thing that comes up a lot if anyone reads nextdoor.com in the central core of the city, and that is the noise pollution from all of the helicopters flying over, and I mean continuously if anything big is going on, such that it's disturbing. Also, the noise of traffic on the large boulevards downtown, particularly related to old cars and Harleys. And years ago, I don't remember how many, 6, 7, 8 years, the city adopted an ordinance, and it was a decibel ordinance, and it sort of revolved around the idea of cruising, actually, downtown. But it had to do with the Harleys and the sound of the pipes, and that the police were going to start enforcing that because it was disturbing the peace of the downtown core neighborhoods. It's never been enforced. So under this mayor, under our new police chief, and we all agree that we will have one, likely command staff, retraining, we'll also be revisiting the need to enforce sound ordinances. And I can't think of anything else to add to that now.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
I'll just go next since I have the mic. I think they all have covered a lot of the issues, but one thing I want to say that's really important is, you know, our environment department has to go out and do inspections. Number one, first and foremost. And I'm all about those kind of things because that's how you find out about those problems early on. If you don't go out and do inspections, you're not going to find out. And it's that laundry plume that Susan brought up. I live in that area. That's why I'm really familiar with it. And I actually get a notice where it's moved to, what's happening, what's going on. And it's because we didn't have our environment department doing good inspections for that. And that's why something like that happened. So I will be the type of mayor that stays on those type of things. Definitely going to have the environment department doing regular inspections. I think it's really important. It goes to our health, safety, and environment. We have to. And because everybody said so much, I'm not going to bore you and repeat it and try and sound really, really smart about this issue. Brian?
Thank you, Ms. Garcia-Holmes.
The good news for you is that Michelle yielded her last minute to me, so I actually have 4 minutes. No, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. I will say these are all great environmental injustices that were brought out, and I've been living through them. The one that wasn't mentioned is, I will tell you, one that we actually avoided. And we avoided it for the first time in the state of New Mexico. We avoided the construction of the Walmart Supercenter that was going to be at the corner of Vista del Norte and Osuna. Now, they were going to do that without an economic impact study, without an environmental study, and they were going full force ahead. And I was very pleased to be part of the team that pushed back against that and was able to stop that Walmart. And now let me just tell you, it wasn't just that Walmart Supercenter that was going to be put in front of a neighborhood of 1,100 people with 1 point of entrance and 1 point of egress. They were going to build that one, and then they were going to go to Coors, and they were going to build that one. But because of the work that we did in Vista del Norte with our neighborhood association and the North Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Associations and the coalition, the North Valley Coalition, talk about the power of neighborhood engagement when it comes to environmental injustice. Good stuff. These are data points that you can look to say, yes, you can push back on big companies that are doing environmental injustices, whether they be at the Air Force Base or whether they be in your neighborhood trying to build a big box center. Because of the work we did in Vista del Norte, they were able to stop the one that was going to go up on Coors. They used the same exact approach and model. It was fantastic. I do want to say that I appreciate Tim bringing up the issue in San Jose. There are people to this day who are struggling to breathe in that area that abuts the South Valley because of the concrete particulates. They could never get anybody to listen to them on. So I appreciate you bringing that. We don't get to talk about that enough on this campaign trail. So those are a couple of the big issues for me. I want to say that it's been an honor to stand with my neighbors in the North Valley. I live in Vista del Norte, as you might guess. I lived on the gravel pit right after it changed from a gravel pit to housing. We pushed back on that North Valley Waste Transfer Station. I'm so pleased and honored that all 8 candidates have said they're going to reevaluate, take a deep breath, and do an environmental study before that goes up. Thank you very much.
We go before the EPC tomorrow. Yeah. No, Thursday. I'm sorry, Thursday.
We want to thank you all for the responses after 27 forums, right? That's a lot. So thank you very much for your time. 8 candidates were invited. 5 of them showed up. Dan Lewis had confirmed and unfortunately was not able to make it. Wayne Johnson had to attend a meeting with the county commission. And Ricardo Chavez, we did not hear back from him. So we want to thank all of you for coming. We have one more question. It's a yes or no question. Simple question. So if elected mayor of Albuquerque, will you attend an anti-racism training and explore ways to have your leadership team do the same? Mr. Colon? Yes, sir, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Garcia Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes, I've already been to one.
Mr. Pedrotti?
Yes.
Ms. Wheeler?
I've been to one before too, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to do it again and take everyone who works in the city.
Thank you. Per our Secretary of State, only 20% of Albuquerqueans go out and vote for mayor. Please go vote, because we're going to have our future mayor here before us on October 3rd. Please go vote. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for That is correct. Early voting starts this